Yep.
The Falcons made headlines by signing a international pathways player,
Yep.
Lenny Krieg. So Younghoe Koo was battling injuries all season. He missed 9 field goals last year. That's the previous 4 years before that, he was hitting at close to 90%. Last year, he was at 73.5%. And there were a couple of games where the result came down to missed field goals. You go back to New Orleans, where I think Koo missed 3 field goals in that game. Obviously, he didn't play the last 2 games, but we could have won the game against the Commanders on a game-winning field goal, and we could have won the game against the Panthers if the replacement didn't miss a field goal. So that's 3 games already. Falcons bring in this guy Krieg, who kind of impressed in that international combine or whatever. He didn't miss. So are you hearing that the Falcons actually think that this guy might push Koo?
I mean, is competition ever a bad thing? Right? Like, I mean, if you bring in a guy who can legitimately kick, and I think that was the issue going toward the end of last year. Like, any kicker worth of shit is not going to be available in week 10, 11, or 12. Right? Like, it just doesn't happen that way. Like, guys, if guys are going to have struggles, they're going to struggle fairly earlier, or, and so, you look at teams, especially with the way that they've changed the role of like scout teams and scout team players and how they can, basically come up and down and go all the way around and all this other, like they've changed it, right? So you can hide players, and I know you can still sign off a certain, like, whatever. There's a lot of, but ultimately for me, again, if a kicker is worth of shit, they're not going to be available that late or halfway through the season, right? So, there was nobody that was going to challenge Koo. And then, when you look at the success he's had, if you're a kicker, coming into last year, why would you come to Atlanta with the way that he had been kicking, right? Like, I mean, he had been one of the best in the NFL over the last several years. And so, like, you're not going to go to a team, especially as a free agent, you're trying to go make a team, not just simply go compete. And so I do like this. I haven't talked to my guy in 3 weeks, right? Like, we've just both been really busy. Typically if something's happening or something's going to happen that's major news, he'll send me a text message. So I have no idea what the plan is, but I can tell you he kicked really well. And given the fact that Koo was up and down and not very good overall last year, if this guy can come in, compete, and kick the way that he did during that tryout, he'll probably make this team, and Koo will more than likely be looking for a job, right? So, again, competition is never a bad thing. It's how we all, that's how everybody gets better. And if you're the Falcons, you should leave no stone unturned when it comes to trying to get better as you try to keep everybody's job after 2025.
Yeah, totally agreed. And this international pathways program thing is kind of cool because you could, even if he doesn't like make the active like game roster or whatever, the Falcons can keep him on as a 17th practice squad player, but they would only be allowed to call him up 3 times a year. And I don't think his salary, when he's under that IPP exemption, would count against the salary cap. So I think that's really interesting as well. One player that thrived with this, or like one of the best players out of this whole ordeal, was Jordan Mailata from Philadelphia. Obviously, he's a big-time offensive lineman now, but he was originally an IPP player.
Was he really?
Mm-hmm. I think from Australia.
I had no idea. He's got an incredible voice too, by the way.
Oh yeah. Jeff, you know what's the hilarious part too? Had the Falcons just had a stud kicker, that's 3 games, we would have won the division. But instead, we go for an 8th straight year without taking down the NFC South, and the Bucks win 4 in a row. Before that, before the Bucks won the division 4 times in a row, the Saints won 4 times in a row. Then we won in 2016, and prior to that, the Panthers won the division 3 years in a row. So since 2013, all 3 teams all teams except for the Falcons have won the division 3 times consecutively, at least. and we've
Wow.
only won once in our Super Bowl run. It's really remarkable that we've only won the division one time since then.
That's crazy. That's it's actually kind of pathetic, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And the Bucks, I think they've won a total of 7 times. The Saints have won a total of 7 times. If the Bucks win this year in 2025, that would bring their tally to 8. That would be the most. That would be the team that won the NFC South the most times, and they would set a division record for most consecutive division titles, being at 5. So we'll see if they can do that, or if we have something to say about it. Here's what I like, Jeff. I liked our front office being more aggressive with the way they're handling contracts. So this past week, Chris Lindstrom, AJ Terrell, both of them had restructures to clear up cap room. And while people were kind of focused in on, hey, we're clearing up this cap space, what are we doing? The thing that caught my eye is that the way we extended these contracts is we added void years to them. Void years are essentially dummy years that are added at the end of contracts. The player's not under contract to play, but it's sort of like a proxy, just blank years to spread out the salary cap hits. The Falcons aren't really known for doing that. Prior to this move, we've literally had one contract that would qualify under this like void year categorization. That was David Onyemata, where we just kicked out $2.5 million into 2026, I believe. Now Lindstrom and AJ Terrell each have $2.5 million at the end of their deal. So like in that void year, right? So the Falcons now have a total of $7.5 million in these void years where the players are not under contract. Now, where am I going with this? I know that was kind of a long-winded spiel. New Orleans, Cleveland, Philadelphia. These are the teams notorious for using void years. Jeff, the Philadelphia Eagles, I'm going to give you a number here. You're probably not going to believe me. They have over $400 million in cap space allocated to void years, which basically means that $400 million is on years where the players are not under contract.
Wow.
So I'm hoping that, I mean, this is the definition of all in, right? Like Philly's really going for it. You see them grab Aziz. You see them like, go through free agency, but they're also smart with it too, right? They're not going and saying like, hey, like they had an opportunity to, move off CJ DJ, release Darius Slay. They kind of see the salary requests coming and they move off the players a year early rather than a year late. So I feel like they're intelligently aggressive. Whereas we have the Saints who just can't throw in the towel and admit that they're not going to win the Super Bowl and they're just signing players left and right. They're not even going to win the division for that matter.
It's when you understand the salary cap, and I don't, and I've been very upfront with that is your thing. I don't pretend I don't know. Hell, I always defer to you. But when you have somebody who understands the intricacies of the salary cap and how to maneuver around it, it obviously makes life a lot easier, and it essentially makes whatever limitations you have fictitious, right? Like it's an arbitrary number if you understand how to finagle and move things around. And there's a reason the Eagles have seen over the last 5 years. They've really been, they've been to a couple Super Bowls. They've won a couple. Are they a dynasty? No, but when you look at what they're doing up there, they're doing some right things, and it would behoove teams like the Falcons to pay attention to what they're doing and hell, go pick their brain, go sit down and they may not talk, but understanding, and it seems like based upon things that we've seen transpire over the last week, that maybe they're starting to understand that there are other ways to be successful and there are other ways to move money around so that you can go sign some better guys. Now, ultimately, we also have to start drafting as well as the Eagles do, right? Because they do that extremely well. But to win a Super Bowl, you got to sign the right free agents, and you got to draft the right guys. And one is not more important than the other. So, maybe this is a step in the right direction with the Falcons. Maybe they finally did hire somebody internally in the front office that understands that better than Fontenot did, and let's be honest, Fontenot coming from the Saints, he doesn't understand that stuff either. He's probably not smart enough. But they clearly brought somebody in who I would say clearly they brought somebody in who understands how to do those things. And maybe we'll start seeing a shift in the philosophy around here. Yeah,
definitely. And the thing is, Jeff, I think you hit it on the head. This doesn't work unless you draft well. The reason why it was actually New Orleans has been doing this for quite some time. The reason why it kind of worked in the beginning is because they had some unreal draft classes. I mean, let's not forget, they're the ones that drafted Hendrickson. They drafted Zach Bond. They got Alontae Taylor, Paulson Adebo. I mean, they hit on these picks in later rounds at a clip that we're just not used to seeing. But now, since Sean Payton left, I don't know that they've had a draft class that really sticks out to me. So, I mean, that was a big factor too. Now you're kind of seeing like the talent come in, try to replace the older players, but they're not as good, which is kind of why they're stuck in purgatory.
Agreed. Then it sucks to suck, but they do. So, it's I don't know. For me, as far as the Falcons go, there obviously has to be some philosophy changes. And I was having a conversation with somebody who used to write for me when I ran the Blogging Dirty website for Fansided here for the Falcons. One of my writers was based over, I think he's in the UK, maybe Germany. I forgot where he is over there, but he's based over there. And we were having a conversation the other day about how the Falcons' internal writers, right? So the people who do all of their do their writing for their website and all of those things, they're quoting like Sport Track, and just how bizarre that is that the team's own media people aren't able to use something other than a secondary website to get information from. It's just really weird that is how they have to do it, right? And so there needs to be some additional philosophy changes. There needs to be some different ways of doing business around here, because ultimately, when you do the same things over and over again, and you think that you're going to get different results, we all know how that goes. We all know that's the definition of insanity, right? And so, things have got to change. And it's not just in certain aspects, like it's from the top down. There has to be a different way of doing business. Because ultimately, when in the NFL, when you've missed the playoffs for 8 straight years, there's something internally wrong with what you're doing, right? Because most teams can fuck around and actually make the playoffs once every 8 years. Like even if it's just a complete accident, like you still see teams making a playoff at least once, right? So when it's a team like the Falcons, who do attract decent free agents, who do have decent draft classes. They've had some decent coaches. For you to be able to do all of that and not make the playoffs says that you've got to change what you're doing from the top down in order to get to where you want to go. And so I don't know, maybe we're starting to see a shift in that mindset a little bit, but they need to put that thing in overdrive and get going.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's wild to me that we haven't made the playoffs in that period of time. It actually made me miss the Mike Smith era where we made the playoffs 4 out of 4 times in 5 years. He kind of got his butt kicked leaving the door, but he was the most consistent coach in franchise history, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, definitely was. And it's crazy. It's crazy that people will say that guys like Mike Smith and Dan Quinn and ran their course here. But when you look at stability and you look at teams that have been really good across the league, you see the stability in coaches, right? Like there's going to be ebbs and flows to success. And the Patriots didn't go to 22 straight Super Bowls, right? Like they played in 9 in 22 years. Like that's really important, right? You look at Kansas City. Their run under Andy Reid has been absolutely insane. Hell, Andy Reid's run in Philadelphia was pretty damn good too, right? And so yes, there are times where you need new guys because the
Yeah, just bring in
message,
fresh blood.
Sometimes the message gets stale, right?
Yeah.
But you also, when you have a great head coach and you have a guy who's done some things, you allow him to revamp that message, right? Like you allow him to put up that sign that says new ownership, or new management. Even though there may not be, it works for stores. And there's sometimes where, a coach can come in and reinvent themselves and do it overnight and reinvent that message and reinvent kind of what they're doing and who they are. And, it's, you just, especially when you have success on the field, you give a coach that leeway. And I just felt like both with Mike Smith and Dan Quinn, they did not provide that. Right. Like those guys weren't given the opportunity to kind of revamp the message and get some things straight. And, even with Dan Quinn, like Dan Quinn's biggest issue was he was loyal to friends. And when you hit on head coaches or you hit on the coaching staff like he did initially, and you start losing guys and you have to replace them, look at that staff that he had here back in 2016, 2017 when Shanahan left, right? Like, look at the guys that he had on staff that he skipped over to go give the keys to Sark. And then when he did it, he didn't even allow Sark to use his own offense, right? Like, he made Sark learn somebody else's offense. And so, it's coaching decisions, things like that you learn from. But again, ultimately, when you have good head coaches, because Dan Quinn's already proven to be a good head coach, Mike Smith proved to be a good head coach, you give those guys opportunities to change the message and revamp things and see if they can, find that spark again. And we don't do that here. I think that's another product of why they've missed the playoffs for 8 straight years. You start playing musical chairs every 3 or 4 years, it's because you're trying to find that guy that has that spark. This is what happens. And now instead of winning the NFC South, you become the NFC South version of the Cleveland Browns.
Jeff, you said something that really resonated with me when Dan Quinn basically told Sark to run Kyle's offense. If you wanted to run Kyle's offense, you had his assistants on the staff. It would have made more sense to let Matt LaFleur or Mike McDaniels call them up, promote them, and make them run the offense they grew up in, as opposed to getting a seasoned coach like Sark and asking him to, and again, the offense was great, though. I mean, I get that argument of it, but if you're going to do it, you might as well get someone that's familiar with it.
I mean, the offense was okay year 1. It was better year 2. And I will go to my deathbed saying that was a lot more about Matt Ryan than it was Steve Sark, right? When you have a Hall of Fame quarterback, it can band-aid a lot of bullet holes, right? And I think Matt Ryan did that. Yes, I know there are a lot of people who will chime in, they'll leave comments. They do all the time about how Sark wasn't the problem. I completely disagree. In big time moments, that dude shit the bed when it came to calls in games. I think the kind of the other part to that too is, the end of Tom Brady and Peyton Manning's career. They, being able to call their own plays, being able to audible, like those things don't happen quite often all the time. I think it made everybody believe that Matt Ryan had that option, and that was just never the case, right? So there's a lot of things that obviously went wrong. I just, I would have gone with a guy like Matt LaFleur. I would have gone with a guy like Mike McDaniels, guys that were young, energetic guys who were on coaching staff, not somebody, and this is not a shot at Sark because, it's I'm not one of, I'm not 30 years old anymore. I'm not going to take a shot at a guy, but let's be honest, he had been out of coaching. He had been in rehab. He was working through some issues that he had personally, and that was the guy you decided to turn your Super Bowl offense over to. And I just thought that was a really tragic decision to make. You want a guy like that on staff. You want to give him another opportunity. That's fine, right? Give him an opportunity. Come on, be a quarterback's coach. Be a tight end. Do something. But to simply say, oh yeah, by the way, you haven't called plays in 2 years because you've been in rehab. You don't give a guy like that the keys. And to me, you made a really bad coaching decision there. And you lost a lot of really great young coaches who, by the way, are fairly successful head coaches now, and who had pretty good offenses, right? So, it's obviously a long time ago now. We're talking a decade ago. But, to me, it's just a microcosm of decisions that have been made within this organization that have kind of led to where we're at.
Jeff, was there ever a push after the Super Bowl to keep Kyle on the staff? Do you think Arthur Blank just tried to throw a lot of money at him?
Oh, I think they did try to keep him. I think the only way to keep him, though, was to have fired Dan Quinn and promoted Kyle Shanahan. But that was never going to happen, right? And honestly, I think the way that Super Bowl ended squarely on Kyle Shanahan, I don't think you could have kept him here, period. I think he knew that. Just the way that ended, and I know everybody's trying to excuse it away. Well, that's just not how they operated. That's not how they did things. And I understand that, right? But to me, moments dictate how you operate, and the Super Bowl moments where you have an opportunity just to simply run a football and kick a field goal, especially when you had Matt Bryant, who ultimately to me is probably one of the top 5 kickers in NFL history. Debatable. Like you run the ball and you give him the opportunity to go win you the game, right? And I think after that there may have been some sort of a push to keep him, but it probably wasn't a very big one. Kyle Shanahan was not a favorite son in Atlanta after that moment.
So let me ask you this, because a lot of people, you hear varying opinions on who gets the most blame. Some people say, and I know you said Matt Ryan didn't have this option, Matt Ryan should have audible to run plays on that final sequence.
But it's not me that's saying that. Like Kyle Shanahan and Dan Quinn and everybody else has come out a billion times saying that there was literally no audibles in Kyle Shanahan's system.
That's insane to hold the quarterback down. That has literally
been said a million times, right? But let's go back to the sequence of events, right? Devondre Campbell, Jesus Christ. What's his name? Devontae Freeman misses that block. Okay. What happens the very next play? Do people remember what happened? Matt Ryan hit Mohamed Sanu for a 25-yard gain down the left side. And what was called? A holding play on Jake Matthews.
Oh, yeah,
so Matt Ryan bounced back, made a big-time play, and it gets nullified by a phantom holding call.
Yeah.
What else do you want that man to do? That man literally just got his head ripped off, came back, made a big time play down the left hash mark for what would have been it was literally a first down, and it gets called back. You can't ask that man to do anything else. But again, Dan Quinn, Kyle Shanahan, Matt Ryan, everybody, Julio Jones, they have all confirmed that there were 0 audibles in Kyle Shanahan's offense.
That I don't disagree with that. I mean, you see it in his offense now. You don't see Purdy coming to the line making audibles. So I'm just saying the conception in the fan base is, Ryan, you're I don't know, at that point he was almost a 10-year veteran quarterback. You have to make that call. So that has been a fan base complaint. Now, other people.
But hold on though. Yeah. Why has that been a fan base complaint? Who came out and opened their mouth and said, I don't give a damn what his offense is, I would have done that? Who came out and said that?
Tell me, I don't know.
Who was the one player that Kyle Shanahan ran off when he got here?
Was it Roddy that said that?
Came out and said, I don't give a damn what that man's offense was. If I was not Ryan, I would have changed the play. And from that moment forward, this fan base has been all over that bullshit.
My boy, I love Roddy, but spreading that misinformation, it seems like. But hey, he got done dirty though. He should have been on that 100%
he did. He absolutely 100% did. He should have been on that roster for that Super Bowl run. Even if he obviously wasn't a 1 anymore, but he was a 3. He could have been a 4. You just don't cut a guy. And people, go back and look. During the 10 years that he played, Roddy White was a top 5 wide receiver. And he got done really dirty by Kyle Shanahan.
Mm-hmm. And he was all right. I mean, I think he could have played at a level almost close to what Sanu was providing at that point. Yeah. He could have been a great 3 if we just kept 100%. Him.
100%.
Yeah, he butted heads with him. And I'm sure, I mean, look, he's a Falcon for life. He had the opportunity to go to Tennessee, make a boatload of money, but couldn't just, boatload for his age at that time, but he couldn't put on another uniform. Like, I will always love, he's my favorite Falcon of all time. And I get why he felt that way. And he probably low key was probably happy we lost that without him.
Well, 100%. And I say this, Roddy White is one of the nicest dudes you will ever meet, right? Once you get over the fact that, like, he's listed at like 5'11", 5'10", he's not. He's like 5'8". Like, you meet him for the first time, you're actually kind of like shocked because you're like, wait a minute, like, you are not 5'11".
Yeah.
Once you get past that, he's one of the nicest dudes on the planet. So 15 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever it was, I used to run security at a steakhouse called STK. They've got one here, New York, Paris, Vegas, and maybe LA
too.
There you go, right? And here in Atlanta, STK is known as the place to go see celebrities. And so my job was to make sure that celebrities who came in, anybody from Shaq to Roddy White to Denzel Washington to everybody else that I interacted with, was to make sure they were left alone and could have their meal happily, right? And so Roddy used to come in all the time. Roddy was a great dude, really nice, down to earth, always took time to take pictures, when he was done eating, as he was going to his car, like, just a really down to earth guy. And, he probably said a lot of things back then, and he's never going to not double down on it even now. But yeah, there was a part of him back then who was really pissed that he got done the way that he did. And rightfully so, by the way, because I still think he could have been productive, even if it's just as a locker room guy, to be part of that roster. Like, you're not going to tell me that receivers 4, 5, and 6 on that roster were better than Roddy White was, even at year 11 or 12. So, I understand being mad. I understand all of that. But just as a side note, just one of the nicest guys you would ever want to meet.
It's funny that you say that he looks smaller in person, because I told you about when I ran into him at LAX. When I saw his face and he was close to my height, I'm not even 5'10", I'm like 5'9.5". He was very close to my height. I was like, oh my God, I thought you would have been much taller than this.
Yeah, right. Like, he's really, really tiny.
Yeah. Jeff, any cool stories from when you were running security at SDK with any other celebrities? Was there ever a cool moment?
So a couple things, right? I'll give you a couple. One personal. I mean, they're both kind of personal, but so for me, I don't get, when I meet people, like, I don't get like, people meet celebrities and they get all kind of like
crazy,
scatterbrained.
Yeah, that's me.
And I forget. Yes, there you go. Right. For me, it only ever happened one time, and it was Charles Barkley. Right. So again, I grew up in Phoenix. Right. I was 13 when the Suns traded. I was 12 when they traded for him back in 1992. I was 12 years old. So like, that dude, like, and the Phoenix Suns run from 92 to 95 or 96 with him in a Suns uniform were probably the greatest years as a fan from a basketball standpoint I'll ever have. And I was, 12, 13, 14, 15, 15 during those runs. And so when he walked in with Shaq and Kenny, after they had done after their TNT show, and they came in late at night one night, I was just starstruck, right? Like, that was Charles. And Shaq is a great dude. Shaq came in almost every night. Kenny came in a lot. Not really a big deal. I love Shaq to death. Great guy. But they brought Charles, and that to me was just that night was absolutely insane. And it actually led up to, I don't know, maybe a year later, when I was at 92.9, we got put up in a hotel that was part of where the studio is because of ice and snow here in Atlanta. And we were down in the lobby with the afternoon show and their producer, Arthur Trish. Trish worked he was the VP of the Hawks communications department for like 25 years. So everybody in the NBA knew him. Right. And so we were down there one night, just all listening to them tell stories. And Charles walked in and sat down and actually had drinks with us. Like, that shit was just that even though I'd met Charles the year before, like, that made my, like, that was everything to me. Right. The one story that I will tell you about Shaq that my wife tells everybody, and it's really meant a lot. Back then, we struggled a lot, and it happened to be a night where I had no idea how we were going to get gas for my wife to go to work the next day. Like we were like broke. And Shaq came in that night. He walked in, made sure he had everything. He was good. Had his car pulled back up to the door so he could leave. Turned around, he handed me a $100 bill and said, "Jeff, I appreciate everything you do for me every night." And like that was gas for my wife to get to work. Like it was just the perfect thing for him to do at the time. And if you hear stories about Shaq, you know that he does that kind of shit all the time, right? Like, buys people bikes and buys people laptops and, takes care of. But that $100 bill literally changed, it meant so much. And so, things like that. Another hilarious story. I probably shouldn't put this out there. Shaq came in. Most of it has to do with Shaq because he was in all of the time, right? Like that was his favorite place to eat after their TNT shows. Plus, it was across the street. And he came in one night, and I had forgot to mention that there was a certain type of lifestyle party in there. And what I will say is Shaq is obviously very heterosexual. He's attracted to females. Okay. The party taking place inside was the opposite.
Oh, so no.
When he walked in, it was really tough for me to keep all of the people a part of that party off of him. And it was hilarious. And we ultimately, were able to get him down to have a meal by himself. And, he ended up, it was fine. But that just initial bum rush of this 7'2", 350-pound man walking in the door with a bunch of people who were inebriated and other things was hilarious.
Oh, man.
That's the best way I can tell that story without telling the story. So
that's great. And the way that you kind of feel about Charles growing up in LA, that Shaq was pretty much my version of that. I mean, the three-peat in the early 2000s when he left LA, I was heartbroken, man. I still remember seeing the headlines in the newspaper, big quote, "I want out," and it just I remember it sunk my heart. But let's move on.
It's funny if you go back and listen to him, and he's done this on a few different things. He always talks about how he wished he had stayed in LA. And he wished that he had been more mature at the time. He wished that he had, instead of just making a decision, based upon his feelings, he says, "I wish I had talked to the family. I wish I had gotten their perspective. I wish I had done, things very differently, and it's one of those things where there's probably not a whole lot of regret in that man's life because obviously he's been very successful in a lot of different spaces. But you can always tell listening to him talk that, especially after Kobe passed away, that was the biggest regret he ever had, was not just simply ending his career in LA and working things out.
And I think the reason for that is, had he actually hit the gym the way Kobe was, put in that work the way he was doing, right? Being as locked in. And I'm not saying Shaq wasn't, but Kobe was just on an MJ
Kobe
level.
Was different though, right? Kobe was just different. You're probably never going to meet a whole lot of NBA. Even you look in today's NBA, maybe LeBron has that kind of commitment. Maybe Steph. But other than that, I don't know. Maybe Giannis, just because you've seen Giannis put on 100 pounds of muscle during his NBA career, so he's hitting the gym. But other than that, I don't know that other than MJ, Kobe, LeBron, Steph, Giannis, I don't know that any other NBA players ever had that type of drive, right? Kobe's drive was very, very, very different.
Yeah, and it hurt him at times too because, see, MJ, he had that drive, right? But he also kicked it with the guys. Kobe was more of a loner, especially early in his career because he was so much younger than everybody else. He would just hit the gym and he would work his ass off. But Mike liked to gamble. He liked to, go out with the boys at night too. So he got to bond with the teammates, which I think made him a better leader than Kobe was, at least in the early part of Kobe's career. But Jeff, let's segue back into the Falcons. As much as I want to shoot the shit about basketball all day too, So let's talk about the draft and then what we could expect with like any free agents maybe in the summer. But let's start with the draft first, and then we'll wrap up from there. So one thing that caught my attention over the past 2 weeks is when our fan base started going crazy once again when Raheem Morris and a bunch of Falcon staffers attended the Marshall Pro Day to watch Mike Green. Jeff, you've been very vocal that Falcons will not take Mike Green. I don't think you're saying he ain't talented. You're just saying he's not going to be on our draft board for other reasons.
So I was told very early on, like at the combine, that he had been taken off the draft board. Okay. Can that change? Of course it can, right? Like, teams will do due diligence on everybody. And that is absolutely, it is funny because NFL security can go find, the person your great grandfather cheated on your great grandmother with back in 1911. It's crazy. Like if you took NFL security, they could probably solve all of the FBI's, unsolved mysteries list within 6 months, right? It's actually kind of crazy how thorough they are. And so is he back on the draft board? I don't know. I was told again during the combine that he was not because of all the sexual assault allegations. And even though he was never charged, there's still multiple allegations out there for multiple years of his young life, right? And so, yes, he's been clean. He has not had any issues. And having as somebody who has been to Huntington, West Virginia, numerous times, because a friend of mine was a All-Conference USA kick returner at Marshall. If he was going to get in trouble, you'd be able to get in trouble at Marshall. So maybe the Falcons have put him back on their draft board. But I will also say this. Sending a head coach and a GM to a workout, especially a public workout, it wasn't a private workout. This was a pro day, does not mean that all of a sudden this guy is going to be in at 15. I have been told that he will not be the selection at 15. That's very important, right? He will not be the selection at 15. Falcons trade back, pick up some additional capital. He falls into the 20s. They very well may take a flyer on him in the 20s. Falcons don't believe he makes it. The Falcons don't believe he goes before the 20th pick, by the way. They think he's going to be one of the guys who slides. I'm not saying that he won't be picked. What I have said is he will not be the pick at 15. And I will stand by that.
So let's talk about prospects that might be the pick at 15. So the three most mocked players to the Falcons are Jalen Walker, Mykel Williams, and James Pierce Jr. I know the first two you've said are on the Falcons' radar. James 100%. Pierce, I don't know if he's going to be the pick at 15.
So I have not. Typically, I don't get more information on the draft board until like what it looks like until about 2 weeks out. At least that's the way it's been for the last 4 years, right? So I do know the first two guys. If the Falcons keep 15 and one of those first two guys drops to 15, you can by and large bet that that's going to be who they draft. They are absolutely enamored with the two guys out of UGA, and I guess three if you include Malachi Starks, right? Like those three guys, as far as I've been told, are the top three guys on their draft board. And I know people don't believe that because they're UGA guys, and UGA people love to be in their feelings about the Falcons not selecting their draft picks in the first round. But I've been told, at least going into the combine and coming out of it, that those three were the top three on their draft board. Obviously, all the pro days, all of the private workouts, all of those things still had to take place, right? So, this is what I try to tell people. If I put out information, one, it's because I got the text message. I don't make anything up, and I can't stress that enough. And I've said it a million times. I got better shit to do than engagement farm on fucking Twitter. I get paid $5.50 a month off of my usage on Twitter. It doesn't behoove me to make up information for $5 a month, right? So as far as James Pierce goes, I know, and we can even put Jahad Campbell in there as well. No idea. I have not been told that those guys are anywhere. I'm sure they're on the draft board somewhere. But are they viable options at 15? Probably not. I have not been told specifically whether they are or they aren't. I know this fan base is absolutely enamored with Jihad Campbell. Don't know why. It's absolutely absurd to me. But right now I do know that those three guys out of UGA are the three guys that were on their draft board coming in to the combine and coming out of the combine. And I have not been told otherwise as far as whether that's changed or not. But again, it's usually about 2 weeks out of the draft. So sometime right around mid-April, I'll have a better idea of what's going on.
Yeah. And I don't get the hype around Jihad Campbell either. I actually really like our linebacking core. I mean, if there's a prospect that can turn into a great pass rusher, that is clearly what we need. So I don't know that we mess around and take a linebacker at 15.
Oh, and by the way, let me just say this. This fan base was like, oh, well, there goes Malachi Starks to 15 because they signed Jordan Fuller. Stop that bullshit now, right? Like, if they want to take Jordan Fuller is not going to change their draft philosophy this year. One, he's fine. Malachi Starks is a better overall prospect than Jordan Fuller is. And so if they keep 15 and Starks is there and they want to draft Starks, signing Jordan Fuller is not going to stop that from happening.
No, Fuller's there to kind of just be like another vet in the room, like he's actually, I think he has a really good relationship with Ross. Seems like he's a high character guy. So I don't know that he's going to come in and become this dominant safety, even though he had a little bit of promise. Like, he was showing some signs early in his career, but obviously injuries kind of derailed him. If anything, putting Starks in the room with him and obviously Jesse Bates, an all-pro, that's going to go a long way. I mean, that's sort of how you breed success. You bring in people, rookies, when you already have all-pros at that position, to kind of show them like the ropes. Think about, like, I know this is kind of to a lesser extent, when we got Joe Horn for Roddy White, when we brought in I think it was Dwight Freeney for Vic Beasley. Like, these things matter when you have a room of vets in there to kind of bring that next generation along. So I mean, Fuller's not anywhere close to those guys' level, but he could kind of, just show him the ropes. He's been to a Super Bowl. Unfortunately, he was injured. He couldn't play in it, but he's had success in the NFL. But moving forward, Jeff, free agency, I mean, do you think that there could be a second wave for the Falcons maybe after the draft, and perhaps if they move off Kirk Cousins June 1st? Because if they move off Kirk post June 1 via trade, that will open up, I believe, close to $25 million of cap room this year. So, I mean, that'll give Falcons a lot to play. I mean, that's a lot to play with, late in the season. Can you foresee something like that happening?
Yeah, I still think that they are. I still think that there's mutual interest between David Andrews and them. I think that, obviously Andrews is still kind of going through rehab from his injury last year, his surgery that he had. He still wants to play. The Falcons are interested. So that's a guy that I would keep my eye on post-draft. I don't think anything happens before that. I could be wrong, but I've been told that there is still mutual interest between the two parties. So I still think that, everybody assumed, except for you've been on top of that the entire time, right? Like, the Falcons, when they move on from Kirk Cousins, it wasn't going to be pre-June 1st for the reasons that you just stated, right? Like, there's a big difference in money, pre and post June 1st. So I think you'll see them move him after the draft as a June 1st designation. And then I think once that happens, excuse me, you'll see them sign a couple other guys that they do need. It wouldn't shock me to see them go after a guy like Andrews. There's maybe a couple other pretty good veterans or decent veterans that are available at certain spots, for sure. I don't think that they're done. Even with the draft coming up, I think that you will see that second wave of free agency coming here in the summer before they get ready to go to camp.
I mean, it's just crazy how, obviously before free agency started, Leonard Floyd, he wasn't on anyone's radar. The 49ers are cutting costs everywhere. They're just letting all these people go. They're kind of hitting the reset button. And then we just get Floyd out of nowhere. I mean, he's a productive pass rusher. He had 10 sacks last year, and we got him for a pretty reasonable deal. So hopefully, you know, around that time, if there are other cuts that kind of come out of nowhere, if we're sitting on 25 million, we can make kind of low-key moves like that. But let's talk about a high-key move, Jeff. We've been also linked to, you know, trading for a pass rusher. If it doesn't happen before the draft, do you see it happening at all?
Probably not, to be honest with you. You know, because if you're going to go get a guy, if you are going to go get, you know, a big time guy like a Micah Parsons, who seems to be the only one really available because things have come to a stalemate between he and Dallas. Dallas is going to want draft capital, right? Like they're going to want 15. They're going to want, and you're probably going to have to give up, you know, like I've said all along, you're going to have to give up three first round draft picks for a guy like Micah Parsons. And for me, I would. Like there aren't a whole lot of guys in NFL history who are worth that type of draft capital, but that guy is. You know, he's about to enter his prime. He's already been unstoppable as it is. If you got to give up 3 firsts, give up 3 firsts to go get a guy like that, right? And so I think if that was going to happen, and you know, everything I've said has already been confirmed, right? Like, you know, the Falcons have reached out. They've at least done their due diligence. They've wanted to make things happen. You know, but we all know that teams love to put dangle guys out there to kind of see what kind of market those guys actually have, and then they reel them back in, right? And so, you know, this wasn't a Lamar Jackson situation where everybody knew Lamar Jackson was never going to leave Baltimore, right? Like nobody was going to fall for that bullshit unless you're the dumbass part of the Falcons fan base who really thought he was available and still won't leave that alone. So, and I say that because, you know, Trey Hendrickson, you know, like he seemingly was available, right? Like they were sinking a shit ton of money in their offense. He wants a lot more money. And, you know, they just decided they can because the market was much bigger for him than I think they thought, but it wasn't as big. So I don't know if that even makes sense, right? Like a lot of teams were interested, but nobody was going to be willing to give up a first-round draft pick for him, which is stupid because for me, I would give up 15 for him. I get it. He's 30, 31, but, you know, he's he's been an all-pro 4 straight years now. He's led the NFL in sacks this last year. He's been top 3 in the last 4. You know, he's been top 3 sacks the last 4 years. Like, to me, I give up 15 for him this year because there's nobody else in the draft that's going to come in and have that kind of impact. And he's still got, you know, several good years ahead of him as well. So, but nobody was willing to give up that first. So now Cincinnati, you know, we all know these guys all have egos. Front office guys have huge egos. Well, now they're going to try to find a way to pay him because nobody was willing to give up a first-round draft pick for him. So I feel like the Falcons did at least entertain some things. I feel like some of it was half-assed because to me, if you offer 15 for Hendricks and you guys swap 4th-round picks or you swap 5th-round picks or whatever you do, I think you could have had him, and I think it would have been worth it. But ultimately, that didn't happen. And so, you know, but again, to answer your question, you know, 30 minutes later, if you're going to go get a guy like Micah Parsons, it's going to happen, you know, pre-draft because Dallas is going to want that pick.
Jeff, you know what pisses me off about both Trey and Micah? They could have easily been Falcons. Obviously, the most obvious connection is at 4 overall in that Kyle Pitts draft, taking Micah, right? That's number 1. Number 2, that same year, Trey Hendrickson was a free agent coming out of New Orleans. Oh, guess where we got our GM from? The Saints front office. You don't think that, like how could Fontenot not think, like, hey, let's sign this guy. He is so good, and bring him to Atlanta where they desperately – I remember thinking at that time, like, we need to get Hendrickson, and it's just I don't know what to do. Now we have to surrender 3 first-round picks, 2 first-round picks to get guys we could have easily got. Like, this is just not a well-oiled machine, man. It's not sustainable, whatever we're doing. Even if we get lucky 1 or 2 years and make the playoffs, Fontenot or Raw are going to just do something stupid to screw all of this up anyways.
You know, I also blame, as far as like missing on Micah at 4, right? it took the right coaching staff to see Micah, because what was Micah coming out of Penn State?
He was a linebacker, right?
He was a middle linebacker at Penn State. Okay, and I say that because that's important. Because James Franklin is an absolute moron. All right. And I can't say that enough. And I'll give you a second example of how bad James Franklin is as a football coach. Coming out of high school, Micah Parsons was the top-rated pass rusher coming out of high school. Got to Penn State, they said, "Holy shit, this is the most athletic guy we have." Old school thinking is you put your most athletic guy at middle linebacker, right? So that's what they did. Would you like to venture to guess before Tom Allen, who's now the defensive coordinator at Clemson, but he was a defensive coordinator last year at Penn State? Would you like to guess where he moved Abdul Carter from?
Don't say he moved him from DN to linebacker.
No. Well, James Franklin put him at middle linebacker. Again, a pass rusher coming out of high school. James Franklin did the same shit again and put him at middle linebacker. Tom Allen shows up to Penn State and says, "What the hell are you doing? This guy's a pass rusher." He moves him to pass rusher, and now what's going to happen with Abdul Carter? He's going to be one of the top 3 picks taken in this year's draft as a pass rusher. James Franklin is an absolute buffoon when it comes to being able to identify actual talent. I can't say identify talent, but be able to identify where that talent should be on a football field. And so it took some foresight by an NFL teams to believe whether or not a guy like Micah Parsons could go from being a middle linebacker in college, and he was pretty good there. He was pretty good. He wasn't elite, but he was pretty good. Could he then be worth a top 5 draft pick as a pass rusher, right? And so it took Dallas, and they were the only ones willing to make that leap. So I don't necessarily just blame the Falcons for that. There were obviously a lot of teams that passed on him.
Yeah.
But to me, it still comes down to, because James Franklin is a terrible coach when it comes to putting his defensive guys. And by the way, he was an offensive coordinator. People kind of forget about that. The tie between James Franklin actually and Raheem Morris is actually the godfather to James Franklin's kids, because they worked together at Kansas State. Raheem Morris was the DC. James Franklin was the OC. I don't know, what was this, 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was. And so, you have an offensive guy, trying to put defensive players in positions that he thinks they'd be best at. And, Micah Parsons, and Abdul Carter are the two names were guys that he just absolutely fucked that up. And thankfully for Abdul Carter, Tom Allen came in and was like, no, this is not where he's going to be used. And he obviously had a hell of a year this last year at Penn State. And then, Micah Parsons didn't have that option. He was a middle linebacker where teams were hoping he could be, some sort of pass rush guy.
Yeah. Do you think Abdul Carter is going to have the same impact as a Micah Parsons in the league? Do you believe
absolutely not. Absolutely not. I do think, though, that if the Titans keep one, it would not shock me to see them pull a draft night switch like you saw with Reggie Bush and what's his name out of NC State all those years ago with the Texans.
Mario Williams?
Mario Williams, right? Where, Reggie Bush was the consensus number 1 overall pick, and the next thing you know, Williams was who they actually took, right? So it would not shock me for everybody to assume that Cam Ward is going number 1 and for Tennessee to go, no, you know what? We're going to take Abdul Carter. Again, I have no inside knowledge. I don't know. It's just a gut feeling that I have. Because when you look at prospects in this, for me, I would take Abdul Carter over Cam Ward because I'm just not enamored with a 6'2" quarterback. And not that his height matters, because we've seen shorter quarterbacks be just fine in the NFL. But for me, I've always said I will never take any quarterback before the 3rd round, because ultimately you need to surround quarterbacks with talent in order to get the best out of them. And so for me, it would make more sense to go get a defensive piece, especially one that is as good as Abdul Carter is. Is he an all-pro potential? Yes. Is he a Micah Parsons? No. Because if you look at what Micah Parsons is doing, the only person to ever have done what he's doing now this early in the NFL career was Reggie White. Like, he's on a whole different spectrum.
Yeah. Jeff, that 06 draft, our division rivals, the Saints, I mean, I know Reggie Bush maybe wasn't all pro, but he was a really good running back for them, especially during that Super Bowl run. But the later picks, they got like Rob Ninkovich, Jari Evans, Marcus Colston in the 7th. They just absolutely dominated that draft. So when you said that, it kind of like gave me a flashback. That was Sean Payton's first draft.
Wow. We've kind of talked about late round draft picks. You know who was really good as a late round draft pick guy?
Who?
Thomas Dimitroff.
Yeah, he got Grady Jarrett.
Look at his late round picks; they were phenomenal. His first, second, third round picks were fucking atrocious. But his 4, 5, 6, and 7th round picks were really, really good if you go back and look.
If he wasn't picking in the top 10, his first round picks were like, oh man, I don't know, man. Like Perea Jerry was one that always stuck to me. Like, where the heck did this guy come from?
Jerry, and then but I mean, he even fucked up the top 10 pick with what's his name out of Arkansas, Jamal Anderson, right? Like,
was that Dimitroff?
Was that not Dimitroff?
I don't remember.
Am I confusing years?
I know that was 07. I don't remember when Dimitroff was 08, I think.
Yeah, Dimitroff's first draft was Matt Ryan, and it was hard. It was easy not to fuck that.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, he kind of messed it up at the end when he traded back into the first and got Sam Baker, who I don't really love, but whatever.
Okay, so Dimitroff, you can't give him Jamal Anderson, which is fine because it was a year before he took over. Yeah. Maybe that's why what's his name? Like they fired everybody, right? That's why like Rich McKay got demoted because he went out and selected a guy like Jamal Anderson.
Yeah, when there was Patrick Willis and Darrelle Revis on the board, FYI.
Yes, yeah, right. But you know, Thomas Dimitroff, like if you could have had somebody else in charge of like rounds of 1, 2, 3, and just left him in charge of 4, 5, 6, 7, he'd probably still be the general manager here, to be honest with you, because his second and third day picks were absolutely phenomenal. Like he knocked those out of the park damn near every year.
Oh yeah, for sure. He had a pretty good track record late round, but again, like if it's not a no-brainer, if it's not like I'm taking Matt Ryan third, I'm trading up, giving up all my picks and getting Julio Jones. If it's not obvious, it was like, I don't know if we should be doing this, but yeah, hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully Terry and Raw keep growing in their roles and surprise us. I'm not holding my breath, but it's crazy because maybe Jeff, maybe the right answer is you got to kind of let coaches mature into their roles a little bit too. Like you brought up the point with Bill Belichick. Like he literally had 2 lives in New England. One where the defense, was the driving force. They rebuilt. They kind of adapted to the offensive NFL, and then they went on a run towards the latter half over 2 decades, right? So like it's about like having patience, about kind of keeping that. Even Howie Roseman had a second life. I mean, he was sort of annexed when Chip Kelly was hired for Philly. They didn't fire him. They just threw him into another building and said like, hey, you have like no voice in the organization. 2 years later, he reemerges and he knocks it out of the park, and he still makes mistakes along the way. He took Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson famously, and Minnesota was laughing at him. But look at him now. He is the most coveted. I would argue that if there's one person more valuable than a quarterback in the NFL, it's probably Howie Roseman.
Yeah, and when you look at it, his first 3 drafts were absolutely atrocious, right? Like his first. If anybody was ever going to get fired for like being really bad at drafting, it would have been him. And then things, for Roseman, things started to kind of turn around. God, what was that year? The Fletcher Cox year, right? So you had Fletcher Cox.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the year before. So 2011 to me is where Roseman started to turn around. He went out his first part of that draft was terrible. But 2011, he takes Jason Kelce. Obviously Hall of Famer, right? 2012, he takes Fletcher Cox, number 1, in their first round pick, 12 overall. Like, Nick Foles, he goes out and gets, right? Like he starts to turn around at the end of 2011 and 2012. 2013 gets Lane Johnson and Zach Ertz, right? Like Jordan Pryor and Matt Barkley, like guys that kind of helped establish that locker room. Maybe not so much from a talent standpoint, but yeah, I mean, you hit on Lane Johnson, you hit on Zach Ertz, you hit on Fletcher Cox, you hit on Jason Kelsey. Like, that really started to build him. But if it had been any NFL team, he probably doesn't get to that point, because Rossman's first 3 drafts, because he started, I think, the same year Thomas Dimitroff did, right? So I think 2008 was his first draft in Philly. A terrible, like, didn't hit on a single person other than LaShawn McCoy in 2009, right? Like, you took Jeremy Maclin, number 19 overall, your first round pick in 2009. You hit on LaShawn McCoy. Other than that, you didn't hit on anybody those first 3 drafts.
Yeah, I don't know where they took Djax, but I would consider Djax a hit for them as well. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing, Jeff, and it really, like, goes back to, like, any role, any job that you have. You're going to be better in year 10 than you were in years 1, 2, or 3. So it's about having the patience, but you also have to show improvement too. So while Roseman had those bad drafts, he did flash at times. He had his Kelsey, he got Fletcher Cox, and
Sean Jackson. Yeah, you're right.
We need to see Terry flash a little bit, because right now, like, he's not looking too hot.
No, he's not at all. He's not, but but again, going back to a conversation that I had with an acquaintance yesterday about this team, right? Like, nobody will talk about it because it's not well known. But this entire front office, the support staff in the front office, is completely turned over under Fontenot. Like, people who've been with the Falcons for years are leaving, and to me, that's an issue. Right, like, they're taking jobs with other NFL teams because of how bad the front office, the culture is, and these are things that are being ignored right now. And for me, if Fontenot doesn't knock out this draft class, he's got to go, because he's clearly an issue, and I think he knows that he's creating issues. So for me, if he doesn't knock out this draft class, I think it's written on the wall, and I don't think that he'll be back in 2026.
When you say the culture is bad, though, is that Fontenot, or is that more McKay kind of creating a toxic culture there, scaring people? Like, what do you think what about it makes it toxic?
I mean, when all of your support staff who have been here for years decide that they can't work here anymore and they go take jobs with other teams.
Yeah.
Like,
for sure, it's a problem. That's a problem. But I'm wondering, like, who is that? Like, is Terry causing that, or is that being caused by another source? Because, like, I don't know, he doesn't strike me as the type of guy to, like.
Oh, when you're the main piece that's changed, when you are the one constant, right? Like, if people have been here for years and they've worked with other GMs, they've worked with other, they've worked with the same director of football operations, because that hasn't changed since 2008, right? Like, those pieces haven't changed. The piece that did change was your general manager, and now all of a sudden people are jumping ship. What's the one denominator that did change, right? Like, that to me is an issue. I have not been given specifics as far as what has changed. I've just been told that people are jumping ship and going and taking other jobs in other NFL cities with other NFL teams because they are not happy with the front office culture here anymore.
That's correct. And if I'm Arthur Blank seeing that, like, and that you have to have that same equation. Like, the common denominator is Terry Fontenot. People are leaving. People that have been here for a long time. I'm kind of stunned that they let him keep his job one more year. Maybe.
Oh, I am too, 100%. I am shocked as well. I think from Arthur Blank's standpoint, one, he's really old, and two, I've been told that he's really trying to groom his son to take over as in the NBA they call it governors. I don't know if it's the same, if it's just owner of the Falcons, right? I've just been told that he's been concentrating a lot on turning things over to his son eventually, and that's been his focus over the last couple of years, is getting his oldest kid ready to take over that task.
Yeah. Well, okay. We'll see how that turns out. But yeah, a lot of things upcoming. But yeah, thanks for everybody for tuning in, for all your latest like Falcons news. Go follow Jeff at JMB_CU16 on X, and then you can also find me on Twitter at Andrew Duhan. Thank you guys so much for listening and supporting the podcast. We'll probably drop another one before the draft, but really appreciate everybody's support.